All right, it is 10 o'clock. Hopefully people keep on getting on. I was a little worried at first. I was going to send out a reminder, but it looks like people are starting to hop on, so that's good. But we're going to get started. Give Cindy and April their full time. We are super excited for the two presenters. We've got our supervisors from Box Elder and Utah County on to help teach us about gluten and gluten-free eating. So Cindy has been working with community and nonprofit efforts for the past 11 years. Include USU Extension, Head Start, Community Action, the American Red Cross, and many other organizations. She's also completed her undergraduate degree in fitness and wellness and her master's in public administration, both at BYU. She's passionate about gluten-free cooking and baking and is thoroughly excited to talk with you all today. During her non-hours, you can often find Cindy outside hiking on one of the many trails near her home in Provo. April is the assistant professor for Utah State University Extension in Box Elder County. She's also a registered dietitian nutritionist with a PhD in nutrition science. She has expertise in general nutrition counseling, managing special dietary needs, child and family nutrition, and diabetes management. April loves food and is the happiest when she is teaching, cooking classes, cooking for her friends and family, or helping others explore new foods. So we're excited to have both of you on. And just for everyone hopping on, make sure you put your name in the chat, please, for roll, and we'll turn the time over to you two.
Thanks, Marcia. We are excited to be here. I think what we're going to do before I share my screen is we're just going to let Cindy get started. So she's going to show you how to make gluten-free bread. And this is a little bit different process than making traditional wheat bread. It acts differently. So we're going to have her show you how to do that. And we wanted to start right with Cindy because it takes a little bit for it to rise. So we'll let Cindy get going and then I'll come back in and talk a little bit more about gluten-free eating and what it is and hopefully answer lots of questions from you. All right, Cindy, you're on.
Okay, I'm so excited to be here and to share this with you because what I said in my bio is totally true. I do really love gluten-free baking and I'm super passionate about it. So I've got everything outlined here for our bread making. And I first off just want to talk about how bread making is pretty different when you make it gluten-free as compared to normally. And so that's why April and I kind of wanted to focus in on this one to really emphasize how there are some big differences, but you can still make some really tasty food here. Okay, so for most bread making, we're going to start out pretty normally, and that is with some water and some yeast. So I've got my water here, and you want to start off with water that's about 95 degrees in temperature. And just to kind of show you a little bit more about this, my water is not to temperature right now, and that's because for some people they can just pour it out of this, they can just like get it out of the sink and they're like, oh yeah, that's about right. For me, I'm not that talented or skilled. So you can see here, I have my thermometer, my food thermometer that's going to tell me what the water temperature is. Okay. And I'm going to just put this in the water and I'll look at it here. So it's at a nice room temperature right now, 71 degrees. Like I said, you can get it out of the tap at the room temperature since I like to measure mine. I'm going to put this in the microwave for just 30 seconds, and that should be plenty of time to get it up to temperature. And it'll be, if you have your water to temperature about 95 to 110 degrees right in there, that is the perfect temperature. So that way your yeast will it'll grow in there, it'll have lots of food to eat, and it'll be really, really a happy environment for the yeast to grow. So I'm just going to let that. Oh, okay. So now that it's been in there for just 30 seconds, I can tell it's a little bit warmer. I'm going to put this in here again. See where we're at. I think this morning when I did this, I think I actually warmed it up for about 40 seconds. So I might put it in for a few more seconds. Yeah, we're at 93 degrees here, 94. I'm gonna give it 10 more seconds just in case. So we should be good now. I'm going to measure one more time. Like I said, this is just important because I think for some people, it's so easy for them to just know the right temperature. For me, I'm like, I don't know. So I like to measure everything. And if you're a new baker, or if you're like me, where I'm not confident there, then you want to do that. Okay, but we're at a really happy 103 degrees, and that is perfect. Okay, so what I'm going to do before I actually put the yeast in there is I'm going to put a little bit of sugar in. So as you can see here, this is my little sugar thing, and I've got about 3 tablespoons of sugar in here. So I'm not going to put all the sugar in because this is another happy thing that yeast likes to eat. It also needs some oxygen and the nice warm water. But I'm going to put about half a teaspoon to a teaspoon in there. So I'm just going to shake a little bit in there. Here, I'll put this, or maybe you can see it a little bit better. Don't need too much. You don't want to overdo your sugar because that can also kill the yeast. So you don't want to put too much sugar in. But half a teaspoon to a teaspoon is great. I've got my yeast here. Just going to dump these guys in. All right. And then, let's see this do something well. I'm just going to mix it up with my thermometer because that's what I have right here. Leave it there. And call it good to go. So this is just going to sit here for a few minutes while I do everything else, and you will be able to see it start to bubble and foam. And that's a really healthy thing to have happen when you're baking. Okay, let's also talk about another aspect of yeast for a minute here. This is active dry yeast. You can get instant dry yeast for your bread. And then a lot of people do that when they make normal bread, and you just throw it all in with the flour and everything else that you put in. And when you do that, it's a pretty fast process, right? You don't have to do this step. However, for gluten-free baking, I really like this step because gluten-free flour is pretty expensive. I mean, if you can get normal flour for, say, $1 to $2 a pound, gluten-free flour is generally, especially if you buy it in a mix, it's usually up anywhere from $3 to $5 per pound of flour. And I don't like to put my flour on the line on these expensive ingredients that I use. And so I really love this step because it tells me that my yeast is ready to go and that it will be working really well when I put it in here with the rest of my flour. And then I don't have to think about, oh, okay, maybe if this doesn't work out, I'm going to have to throw everything away. Because that's the risk you take in using an instant yeast, is that if it doesn't work out for some reason, all of those ingredients go in the garbage because it just didn't work out. You have to start all over again. So that's what I like to do. All right, so let's get started here. I've got my flour, 3 cups of beautiful flour there, and we're going to dump it in. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about gluten-free flour, and that is that gluten-free flour, when you buy it out of the bag, it packs really, really well. Okay, so it packs super nice, even to the point where it can get pretty heavy. So when you measure your flour, I'm just going to show you with this over. It's really important to measure kind of like this, where you scoop it in, and then once you get it up to about a cup, you can just scrape it nicely off the top. You can use a knife to do that. And then you just stick it in there. So when you pull it out of the bag, it's really good to do that. And that's because since gluten-free flour packs so nicely, I'm just going to have this right here. You can have really, really dense food if you don't do that. And so it's really nice to just make it a little bit lighter by breaking it up this way. And then another thing that you can do is A lot of gluten-free recipes, you measure them by weight. I have a nice kitchen scale that I love to use in my home because I love gluten-free baking. I do it all the time. And so some recipes, they only use cups, like in the one that we use, it only has cups in the recipe, but many gluten-free recipes actually go by weight. And like I said, since I love to do gluten-free baking, I have a kitchen scale where I can just weigh everything, and it's super nice to do it all by weight. But this one, since it is a pretty simple recipe and you're just going to be measuring the flour, not by weight, it's good to do this. Okay, so let's dump it in. And in it goes. I'm going to scoop that over here. All right, and next I'm going to get the rest of my sugar right there, the stuff that I use, put it in. And next I'm going to get my salt. This is 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Put it in. So I'm sure you have the recipe right there, but it's 3 cups of flour, 3 tablespoons of sugar, all together, even including the little bit put in the yeast, which is starting to foam. So pretty. Okay, you can see it here. And 3 cups of flour, 1.5 teaspoons salt, and then 3 tablespoons of sugar. So I'm going to mix this up just a little bit here for a second. And something that I also want to talk to you about is what you want to be using to mix your flour and to mix all of your ingredients. So if you have a hand mixer at home, you know, one of the ones where you just mix it by hand. I've got one right here. This one. If you have one of these, that works. You can put this in a big bowl. You can mix it by hand. When we did all of our recipe testing over the summer, April and I are on a grant where we did that. We use KitchenAid mixers. I've got a Bosch, obviously, and that's because, again, like I said, how I like to make gluten-free goods all the time. This is super helpful for me because I'm doing just one batch of this right here, right now, right? And so if you're doing it by hand, it's really easy to do one with a hand mixer. It can get a little sticky, it can get a little gooey, but it works for the kneading. But since I sometimes like to double my recipes to do more, so that way I can just stick it in the freezer and keep it for later, I love having something that is a little bit, has a little more horsepower to it, right? So that way I can mix everything together. It's super easy just to throw it in. But like I said, you can use a hand mixer for this if you want. You just mix it for the same recommended amount of time for the 3 minutes. Okay, and I think we're ready to move on. Our yeast looks so nice. Can you guys see that really well? Look how you can see here, this indicates that your yeast is rising super well, because you can kind of see how this bottom part is a little bit darker up until about there. And then this part on top is all foam. That means that your yeast is growing. It's really happy. It's all warm in there. It looks super duper good. Okay, and I'm going to take this off. And I'm going to throw everything in and work in a knead. Okay. And then I also want to talk about substitutions here. In this one that we've done, right, I've got some flour that has a higher level of cornstarch to it, because I think that makes for a really tasty bread. And then I've got oil. So some substitutions you could do here is you could use a different gluten-free flour. That would be okay. I just love the taste and the texture that I get from a flour blend that has a higher cornstarch to it. And then most flour blends, they have usually they have rice flour, they have tapioca starch, potato starch as a base. Some other ones have maybe sorghum in them, cornstarch, things like that. You can get a lot of different mixes. So if you're just kind of wanting to do one easy, but you are thinking about doing bread, it might be nice to find one that has a higher cornstarch to it, and that'll make for a really tasty bread. Okay, you could also, instead of oil, use butter. melted butter, that would be okay. It would it would make for a little bit of a richer flour. You could also probably put some herbs in here, you know, if you wanted to have like a tasty herb kind of bread. I'm just like a plain and simple kind of gal when it comes to bread. I want to make peanut butter sandwiches out of it, and maybe put some butter on there for a day. I don't know, whatever I want when it comes to the moment, but I like it plain and simple. So that's what I do here. But you could substitute a lot. Okay, so I'm gonna just throw everything in here. All right. Okay, 3 eggs in, 1/3 cup of oil in, and then I'm gonna get my handy little scraper. Yes, it does say made with love, because I always make my food with love. And I'm gonna dump all this in here. Scrape out all of my yeast, because the yeast is gonna help so much. And I'm going to get ready to knead the dough the way you need gluten-free flour and dough. Okay. And to do this, I'm gonna scoot up my other camera a little bit so you can see it a little better. Okay. All right, you should be able to see right inside my bowl now. Yes, okay, it's all in there. I'll put this still on top. And while I knead it, because gluten-free flour and baked goods, they tend to be a little bit more liquidy to give it the moisture and other things that it needs. So it's gonna look a little bit like thick pancake batter. It's not gonna look quite like normal dough. And that's why the kneading part actually takes place here inside my mixer or inside your bowl if you're doing a hand mixer. And I'm gonna let it go for 2 to 3 minutes. I'm probably gonna scrape it at 2 because it's going to be a little loud. You won't be able to hear me. I'm actually going to mute, and I'm going to let April chat with you about some gluten-free pointers here for just a minute.
That's looking great. So yeah, keep an eye on her bowl, and then she'll stop me when she's ready. Okay, so you should be able to see, I'm going to share my screen really quick. Should be able to see a slide about gluten. So let me know if you see.
April,
Yeah.
we actually see your note section, so we see the next slide
Okay.
one.
Thank you. I thought I had it fixed, but apparently
There you
not.
go. That's perfect.
Okay. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about what gluten is as we're watching that lovely batter. Gluten is a protein that is found in wheat flour. And it's pretty amazing because it has the ability to stretch really far beyond what most proteins can do. It will stretch and it will grow and it will gather air bubbles, and it creates those lovely wheat products that we're all so used to and that we love. However, there is a food allergy type. I say allergy just so that you understand, but it's actually a different kind of response that the body has to gluten. And because of this, people that have this autoimmune disease, it's actually an autoimmune disease where the body looks at gluten and is like, it's something's foreign here. And so it attacks your body to try to get the gluten out of your body. And because your immune system thinks that it's bad. When that happens, they get really sick and they're not able to function or have health. And so gluten becomes a problem. However, it's kind of an interesting disease because we can cure it by changing someone's diet. As difficult as that may be for some people to eat gluten-free, they don't have symptoms. They can stay in a diet where they don't eat gluten. But the problem comes in when we're trying to make food that is gluten-free that acts and tastes and is like wheat-containing flour, right? So that's kind of the challenge. And that's what Cindy's showing you is this bread that she's making. It doesn't look like typical wheat bread, right? Where we can get it to where we can actually knead it with our hands and form it into a ball, and then it'll stretch and capture air bubbles and create those nice pockets in the bread. we have to use other substances to try to mimic the actions of gluten in the bread. And so it will become more like a batter, like you can see, because the flours that we use for gluten-free flour blends don't have wheat in them, for one, but they have to have some kind of a binder. So she used eggs, which is one binder. And then we also, most of the flour blends will have some type of a gum, usually xanthan gum. Now she mentioned cornstarch. Cornstarch is kind of what mimics that lift in gluten-free bread. We use rice flour, pea flour, sometimes in these, but potato starch. But cornstarch just has a really good ability to stretch and grow a little more than wheat flour, than other starches. So that's why a high cornstarch flour will give you more of a lift and it will act more like wheat bread. Okay, it looks like Cindy is done. So she's going to pan it. And if you notice, she's going to do this. It's going to look like a batter bread. So if you're used to like a quick bread, it's going to look like that. So I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second, let her show you how to pan it.
Okay, all right, I'm gonna pull this off. All right, you can see here, yeah, it looks nice and smooth, but you can kind of see the dough moving. Yeah, it looks nice and liquidy, which is beautiful. It's super moist. This is going to make a beautiful moist bread for us. Just gonna pull this off. It also has a shorter rise time than normal bread. Normal bread, you usually let it rise for an hour or two. This one, you only have to let it rise for about 25 minutes. Okay, so put this in. I wanted to show you some of the scoop. I should scoop this off. This. And hopefully you can see this. So put it in here. Look at that, it's so gooey. So different from normal bread, but very tasty. And especially for, this is a recipe that I really, really love. Like I said, April and I are part of a grant that we did. Oh, sorry, I've got to scoop this here. Over the summer, we did a bunch of testing with gluten-free breads. And I had a couple people come over and try out different breads and things like that. I love this one because this is one where people were like, oh my gosh, this tastes like normal homemade bread, right? That is made with gluten. And that's one of the great compliments of gluten-free baking, when people are like, oh, it tastes like normal bread or normal cookies or normal whatever. And this is one of the really good ones that I loved what people said about it. It does look a little different when baked. It doesn't look quite like normal bread, and I'll show you that here in a little bit. But I'm gonna scrape this out here. Oh. Sorry, it is pretty liquidy, so it gets a little messy in there.
So Cindy, we're getting a little short on time. Is it okay if I keep going and you just get it all panned up and ready to race?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, and then you guys can even just watch me. I'm gonna put some saran wrap over this and spray it so that way it can rise. And so you go ahead and just keep going, okay, April?
Okay, thanks. All right, so gotta get my back on my share screen. Here we go. All right, hopefully you're seeing the right one. Okay, so Cindy's gonna just get that, and it's really important on that bread that you smooth the top, because it doesn't rise like normal gluten-free or like gluten bread, where it will actually kind of really move all of the molecules in the bread. It's a very subtle rise in that bread. So having a smooth top, that's how it's gonna come out of the oven. So take a little more time to smooth that top, and maybe even make a mark down the middle. That will help it as it raises to not have a really funny looking top. It looks a little more like sandwich bread. All right. So I wanted to talk for just a minute, and you can all tell me what you think. I want you in the chat or wherever. Let me know what you think. Can't really see the chat very well. Oh, I figured it out. Okay. Tell me if these statements are fact or fiction. All right. So eating a gluten-free diet is healthier. Gluten-free food is more nutritious. Eating a gluten-free diet is a good way to lose weight. And gluten intolerance, sensitivity, and celiac disease are a fad. What do you think? Fact or fiction?
Fiction.
Fiction. Good. I'm glad you know all that. Are all of them fiction? Yes, they are all fiction. Okay. Some people always tell me, well, what about it's healthier to eat gluten-free? And it really isn't. There's actually less nutrients in gluten-free flour because right now the FDA does not require that gluten-free flour be fortified. And we fortify our flour, our wheat flour in the United States for a lot of reasons that I won't go into today. But right now, gluten-free flour doesn't have the same recommendations or requirements. And so there's actually less nutrients in gluten-free flours and gluten-free commercially baked products. So individuals who have celiac disease need to probably be on a multivitamin to help them get as many nutrients as we who eat gluten-containing products get in our diet. Gluten-free food is also, it's nutritious, and because it adds calories and fiber or protein and fats and things to our diet. So yeah, there is nutrition in gluten-free food, but it is not more nutritious. And sometimes because gluten-free food it tastes different than typical food, we tend to put more sugar and salt in them. So they can actually have higher concentrations of calories and not all those things that you really want very much in your diet. Unfortunately, eating gluten-free or having to switch to a gluten-free diet can cause weight loss, but it's not one that we look for. It isn't a healthy way to lose weight. It's simply because some individuals that have to eat gluten-free struggle to find foods that they like to eat on that diet. And so they're actually in a place where they're not very balanced in their eating. So we try really hard to help clients learn how to eat a balanced diet when they have to eat gluten-free, because it can be a challenge. And then the next one, we're going to go into just a little bit. Get my slides to that. There we go. So we'll talk about the gluten intolerance and those kind of things in just a minute. But why do some people choose to eat gluten-free? Most often it is because it is a recommendation on a medical level for them to eat gluten-free to avoid symptoms of the autoimmune disease caused and triggered by gluten. So we use it as treatment for disease. We are careful though, because gluten-free diet is nutritionally limited. Anytime that we limit someone's diet and we say you can't eat this, we are adding a problem into their life because it becomes more difficult for them to get the foods they need to be healthy. So that's a concern. And then, like I said, most gluten-free foods are higher in fat, sugar, and salt to compensate for the flavor and taste of gluten-free flours. So what's the difference? Celiac disease is, like I said, it's an autoimmune disease, not a food allergy. And there's a difference there. People will have celiac disease or they will have wheat allergy. A wheat allergy is a normal food allergy, where celiac disease is an autoimmune disease. And they're both triggered by the protein in wheat, but it's just a different reaction in the body. An autoimmune disease is where the body becomes confused at something that should be acceptable in the body and isn't. And so the body will attack its own tissues to try to eliminate that, that molecule that the body thinks is bad. So typically the body will attack the gut tissue or like your intestines, because what it does, when it does that, our gut tissue will swell or become inflamed, and then we don't absorb food. So you can see the body thinks, oh, I'm doing us a favor. I'm helping us survive by making it so I can't absorb that protein because that's a bad protein. And it's just something that's just irregular in some individuals, where a food allergy will initiate an autoimmune response. So that's when we get that anaphylaxis or The closing of our airways, we'll get hives, those kind of things. It's different than the autoimmune disease where the body is attacking itself to try to eliminate absorption of that protein. And it's doing it all in the attempt to keep us alive, right? However, this is a problem because if someone has long-term exposure to gluten and their gut is always inflamed, you can see what's happening, right? They can't absorb because we require a really healthy gut that's not inflamed to absorb all the nutrients we need for health. So they can't absorb what they need to stay alive. And they may be eating, but they're starving to death, all right? And it becomes a real problem. And we start to see some really bad symptoms in individuals as the disease progresses, if they don't know that they have it, or if they haven't treated it and they continue to eat gluten, they're going to have more and more problems as they get older and as time moves on. Some of the long-term effects can include cancer. All right, that is one of the main problems with celiac disease over time if it's not treated. Stomach pain, vomiting, migraines, headaches are typically one of the first symptoms. I know my daughter struggles with that. She has celiac disease and she knows almost immediately that she had gotten gluten because she'll get a migraine or a really bad headache. I've heard other people say that it's like a foggy head. A lot of times gluten symptoms will act like chronic fatigue. So they're tired all the time, which makes sense because they're not absorbing food, right? So they don't have enough to function. So the body will go into a kind of a fatigue state where it doesn't have to use much energy. Sometimes they will get celiac acne, which usually runs along the sides of their chin and the backs of their hands. Rashes, sometimes they'll get big boils on their necks and the undersides of their arms. But more long-term effects, like I said, cancers, osteoporosis, because we aren't feeding our bones and keeping those strong because we can't absorb the nutrients to do that. People will have early onset osteoporosis. They'll get anemia, which is where they're not getting enough iron. People that had this a long time and haven't treated it will struggle with infertility and other neurological conditions. So it's important that people with these diseases treat them and take good care of them, okay? So a few of the things, and I want to go into a lot of detail because we just don't have time, but the main disease that is gluten triggered is celiac disease. There is another one that is still kind of not researched. It's called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. It doesn't have as much research behind it. We really don't know what the mechanism is for that disease. And while some people will say, well, I'm gluten intolerant, as far as the medical community knows, with the amount of research that's behind that, there's no such thing as that. We either have celiac disease or we don't. And so if someone tells me they're gluten intolerant, I tell them they need to be on a gluten-free diet if they're having those symptoms. Even if they can't get a conclusive diagnosis from their doctor, they still may have celiac disease. And so learning how to manage it with a gluten-free diet and being careful with supplements and other things to get a balanced diet is helpful for them. So what can people eat? This is usually the biggest question that I get. Oh, I have celiac disease. I don't know how to do that. And that may be really relevant for you as you are out doing classes with people and they tell you, oh, they have celiac disease. How do I deal with that? How do I make sure that that child can be part of the class and still participate, or this person can still participate in the class and in the tasting without causing problems to their disease or their allergy? So this, I hope, will be a little more helpful for you in learning how to do that better in your roles. So they can have all the food groups, right? They can have dairy, fruits, protein, vegetables, and grain. Really, the only thing that is limited is wheat and wheat flours. However, we have a problem in our country because we have a lot of processed foods. All right. So if it was that simple, and if I could just say, don't eat wheat, it would be great, right? It would make lots of people's lives so much more simple if we could just do that. However, because of the nature of our processed food in our country and lots of countries, we use wheat, or wheat gets into our food when it typically wouldn't be there because of processing. All right. So we have to be really careful about what foods that we're giving to people, that we read labels, and that we understand the basic principles for gluten-free eating. Okay. So dairy is great. There is no gluten in dairy products. However, you need to watch for additives. So that would include things like in yogurts, if they have grains. So sometimes they'll have a granola that would be mixed into the yogurt, or crackers or cookies. That's true for ice cream. All right. So we have to look at the additives, what's going into the milk. There's even some milks, like they have a cookies and cream milk, which is actual cookies that go into the milk. So that one would not be gluten-free, right? Regular milk would be, but one of the flavored ones with additives would not be. So they can have pretty much any dairy product, just be aware of those additives. Fruits and vegetables are all gluten-free, all right? So the only thing to watch on that is if you're buying canned or frozen, check labels to see if they've added something in there that shouldn't be there. Anytime it's a packaged food, I read the label. We found some really interesting things on labels looking for foods for my daughter. Proteins are great too. Meat, beans, nuts, none of those have gluten in them, but watch for additives, okay? So in processed meats like hot dogs, lunch meats, those kind of things, sometimes they will have wheat as a filler. So we need to watch those. And then grains, there's a lot of different grains that they can have, like amaranth, buckwheat, as long as it's labeled gluten-free, okay? It's naturally gluten-free, but it gets milled on machines that use wheat. So sometimes it's not. Oats, same thing. They can have oats, but they have to be milled on machines that don't mill wheat products. Sorghum, brown, any kind of rice, tapioca, potatoes, popcorn, all of those are all gluten-free naturally. So what's the best way to avoid gluten? Read labels, right? Some foods you don't have to worry about because, fruits and vegetables and most proteins, if it's just a cut of meat, it's gluten-free. Other things you'll need to read labels if it's processed. Look for things like malt. So malt is a wheat product, but a lot of people don't know that's a wheat product. Barley, modified food starch. If it says that, you don't know exactly which starch they're using, so it could be wheat. Natural spices also may contain wheat, and we won't know because it's not listed on the labels, and it's not required to be listed on the labels. Soy sauce is also a wheat product. There are some that are gluten-free, but you need to check labels for that, okay? So just be aware, there's some different things that can cause things to not be gluten-free. And I actually have some handouts that I failed to get to Marcia, and I will get them to her, and hopefully she can share those with you that kind of go into more in depth on what to watch for on labels. Another thing to be conscious of, and it may not work, you may not have to worry about it in your work because you usually work with food, but gluten can also be in cosmetics and medication as binders for pills. Shampoos and conditioners can have that, and people with celiac disease should not touch or have gluten come in contact with their skin because it can cause some serious issues. So we need to watch that. Oral care products, and then alcohol. So beer is a wheat product. A lot of my clients don't understand that. You can't have beer, and some wines will have additives of wheat in them. So, all right, any questions or anything on this so far? All right, I don't know if Cindy's quite ready to do our next part, so I'm going to skip past this, and we'll stop me when you're ready, okay, Cindy? Okay. All right. Now, so the study that Cindy was kind of talking about, we decided that we wanted to go and learn a little bit more about gluten-free baking for a few reasons. A few people in our group eat gluten-free on a regular basis for their own reasons. And they have found that it is a struggle to find commercially available foods like bread, crackers, cookies, tortillas, all of those good things that we have as staples in our diet in America. It's really difficult to find those products in stores that you want to eat. I don't know if any of you have ever eaten a piece of gluten-free bread that's purchased at a store. Often it's really hard. It's hard to chew. It doesn't have a very good texture in your mouth. The flavors, a lot of times, they're terrible. And so it becomes discouraging because the products are really expensive. So I have found a commercially available bread for my daughter that she doesn't mind, but it's $5 for a really small loaf. I think there's 10 pieces of bread in that loaf. So that's super expensive, right? For her, and it tends to spoil very quickly. So it can become very discouraging. So we wanted to find a way to make gluten-free baked goods at home, which would, one, make it cheaper. It would be less expensive, because even though the flour blends are expensive, like Cindy said, they're still less expensive than purchasing the commercially prepared food. So it was important for us to be able to tell consumers, okay, we know it's expensive to purchase those goods, so let's show you how to make them instead. And so that's what we've done. And so we were looking at ways to use commercially available gluten-free flour blends. Now you can make your own flour blend, and many people did this before there was so much available out there. But the ones in the grocery stores are good and they work really well. And they've done a lot of scientific testing on them that we haven't done. And so we used ones that were available so that we could tell you and other consumers what to use and how to use them properly. So we also looked at techniques. So what we did for our study was we did some preliminary testing, which was so fun. I don't know. So Paige Ray and Eva Timothy are also part of our group, and Karen Allen. And I had a great time making a mess in my kitchen. I don't know if everybody else did. Me and Cindy had fun doing all the different flour blends and different recipes. And yeah, we had a good time. But it can be kind of frustrating because they don't turn out the way you think they're going to every time. So we did that for a couple weeks, and we'd come back together and talk about our results and what we wanted to do. And then we decided on 4 flour blends that we were going to use and 4 specific recipes. And then we went to Logan and used their testing kitchens up there. We had Karen Allen helping us. She's an extension specialist, and she has all the scientific equipment you need to test food. And so we got to go and bake for a couple days up in Logan and be able to see the effects of the different flours and how they were scientifically tested, and to be able to make better recommendation for consumers on how to make their own gluten-free products at home. And then once we had that in-lab testing done, we came up with a few conclusions, and then we sent some gluten-free flour kits to some consumers that we were able to track down that were willing to help us with this study. And they did the recipes in their home and gave us feedback about how it worked for them. So a few lessons that we learned is that there's a lot of gluten-free flour blends out there. Like Cindy said, there's some that are higher in cornstarch, some that are higher in potato starch. So these are 3 of the flours that we used in our testing. And the cup for cup, I believe, is the flour that Cindy is using for her bread, because we found that one was the best for bread making because it has a higher concentration of cornstarch in it. I think it's like the first ingredient on the label. So that gives you a clue of how much by weight. It's the biggest ingredient by weight in that flour. And then we have the King Arthur flour, which also had a good amount of cornstarch in it, but a few other different ingredients. And then the white gold flour. We also used another one. It was a local flour called Grandpa's Kitchen. I just couldn't find a picture for that one. And so those are the 4 flours that we use. One thing we learned is that the results are not the same. We use the exact same recipe, the exact same flour for all of the different recipes, and did not turn out the same way for all of them. So it's really important to practice and to be careful in your techniques as you're doing gluten-free baking. But we also learned that you can make really good gluten-free food and at home using these commercial flour blends. So the cookies up there were made using King Arthur flour, and they are very good. I had several people, in fact, I had a lady call me, one of our consumers that had been part of our study. She called me because I provided them my contact information, and she said, okay, I'm so-and-so, and I am part of your consumer study, and I made the chocolate chip cookies, and I think you might have made a mistake. And I was like, what did I do? And she's like, I don't think you sent me gluten-free flour because those don't taste like gluten-free cookies. And I just started laughing. I'm like, nope, I'm pretty sure that was gluten-free flour. And she's like, well, how's it possible? They don't taste like gluten-free. And I felt like that was a win. Like that was one of the biggest successes of our study is that here's this lady, she'd been eating gluten-free for 6 years. All right. So she knew she had celiac disease. She's been eating gluten-free that long. And she just ate a cookie that tasted like a normal cookie to her. And that was an extremely, and I know it's kind of funny for some of you to understand this, but it was kind of an emotional experience because so many of these people just want to have a normal experience, eat normal food that they're used to, that they've been eating since they were young. And for her to have that experience of a really good chocolate chip cookie, it made my day and it made her day. We also made some really good pizza. That was Cindy's favorite thing, was the pizza. She loved making that. And we made some really good ones. And the home baked was preferred over commercial products. We tested them sensory wise against commercial products. So it was all good and everybody loved it. So, and then lastly is that we need more research. There's a lot of things going on and a lot of different products that we have not tested and nobody's really tested. So we want to do some more testing to see if we can use other things like tapioca starch and almond flour to make really good products. All right, I'm going to kick it back over to Cindy to show us bread, and then we'll take any questions you have after that.
Okay, I'm back. All right, so I just want to show you the bread. This is just about ready to go in. Like you can see how nicely risen it is. I'm just going to show you here where it's risen up. I think I'm going to give it just maybe 5 more minutes. My bread has been rising just a little slowly, but this is really nice. This is just like a normal bread pan, and it has the appropriate amount of volume necessary for gluten-free bread. And then I just want to let it rise a teensy bit more, but not too much more, because this will actually rise a little bit more in the oven. So if you don't want it to be, sometimes with a normal loaf of bread, you let it get kind of big and then you bake it. For gluten-free bread, you just want it to be like just maybe about 1/2 inch below the sides right here where it's highest. I'm going to give it just a teensy bit more time to rise, and then I'm going to throw it in the oven. And then when you put your saran wrap on, you don't want it to be too tight because the bread needs oxygen to rise. So I'm going to tell you that. And then I'm going to show you the loaf I baked this morning. Okay, so this is a beautiful loaf of bread. Oh my goodness. It is definitely gluten-free bread. As you can see here, it has character to it. But this is gonna be super tasty. So I'm just gonna show you, gonna cut off an end here. I'm gonna show you what it looks like inside. All right. So you can see here, these little things here, the little holes. In the scientific terms, I learned that this is called cells. And so one of the big things that in gluten-free baking is important to know about is the cell size, because sometimes gluten-free bread is called holy bread. So when you mix it, about how we mix it, you usually get a nice cell size, and when you have a good recipe, so that's how you want it to look. So this is super tasty gluten-free bread. I'm going to put some butter on this and eat it as soon as we're done because I'm ready to eat. Okay, any questions from anybody?
In the chat, Erica asked for the recipes, and April responded that she'll get me some of the paperwork and stuff like that, and then we'll send it out to everyone. So you will be getting that in your emails.
We love to send out recipes. This is something that we worked hard on so that way we could share with everyone. So yes, if you're even considering baking gluten-free, please let us know. We'll send you the recipes. Or if you have a friend who maybe needs some recipes. For people who eat gluten-free, this is just so nice to have something that is tasty and good. And I can definitely relate to April where she was like, it gets a little emotional because you're like, I can eat it and it tastes good.
Catherine has a couple questions.
Okay, perfect question. I can take this one, April. Okay, For gluten-free bread, it's actually better if you freeze it. So what I'm going to do once we're done here, I'm actually going to cut this up into just normal bread slices. I'm going to stick it in a freezer bag, and then I'll put it in the freezer. And then whenever I want another piece, I will just pull out one piece and warm it up in the microwave, toaster, let it sit. And so that tends to be the best preservation for gluten-free food because it does tend to go dry really fast.
And what I do is I put 2 pieces in a Ziploc, little Ziploc, and then my daughter can just pull that out and stick it in the microwave for 15 seconds and make a sandwich. And they do hold up really well for sandwiches. These ones do. Now, we've had others that don't very well, but the bread that Cindy just made with the cup for cup flour is excellent. And it does. My daughter can make a regular, like, big sandwich off of it and cut it cute, like they do in the restaurant, and it holds up and she feels like she's eating like the rest of us. So yeah, works really well.
That's what my sister does. And thank you, Heidi, for the compliment. That's very nice of me to say.
And so for the recipes, the ones that I can share with you now, they're not quite our finalized one. I just need to say that we are planning to publish this. So we can't give you our completely finalized ones yet. And we haven't gotten all the edits in, but they're super close. Okay. So I have the rolled cookies, the drop cookies, and the bread. The pizza crust one, we are still fiddling with. It's been a little bit tricky on that one. So I will get that out to everyone once we have that one a little in a better place. Okay. But the other ones I will send to Marcia right now.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for these two? If you need camera setup tricks when you're doing your demos, reach out to Cindy.
Just have this.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. It's fantastic. And I know I learned a lot. And now I wish I was in Utah County to try the bread.
I know.
I guess
right?
I'm going to have to make it myself.
How fast can you be to Provo, right?
That's right. All right. Well, thank you. And just have an awesome day, everyone. We're excited to see you all on Zoom every week. And I think our next get together will be the first Monday of April. Kind of crazy that April is almost here. Thank you, guys.